Chapter 4 of Top of the Ladder, Marine Operations in the Northern Solomons by John C. Chapin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Battle at Sea. A final part of the planning for the main landing on Bougainville had envisioned the certainty of a Japanese naval sortie to attack the invasion transports. It came very early on the morning of D+1. On the enemy side, Japanese destroyer Captain Tamichi Hara, skipper of the Shigure, later recalled it was cold, drizzly, and murky with very limited visibility as his destroyer pulled out of Simpson Harbor, Rabaul. He was part of the interception force determined to chew up the U.S. invasion troops that had just landed at Empress Augusta Bay. The Shigure was one of the 6 destroyers in the van of the assigned element of the Southeast Area Fleet, which included the heavy cruisers Myoko and Haguro, together with the light cruisers Agano and Sendai. At 0027, 2 November 1943, he would run abreast of U.S. Task Force 39 under Rear Admiral Merrill, who stood by to bar the enemy approach with 4 light cruisers and 8 destroyers. Among his captains was the daring and determined Arleigh Burke on board the Charles S. Osborne, DD-570, commanding Desdiv, Destroyer Division, 45. This encounter was crucial to the Bougainville campaign. At Rabaul, Rear Admiral Metsuji Ijuin had told his sailors, "Japan will topple if Bougainville falls." At 0250, the American ships were in action. Captain Burke, later to become Chief of Naval Operations, closed in on the nearest of the enemy force under Vice Admiral Sentaro Omori. Burke's destroyers fired 25 torpedoes, and then Merrill maneuvered his cruiser to avoid the expected long-lance torpedo response of the Japanese and to put his ships in position to fire with their 6-inch guns. "I shuddered," Hara wrote later, "at the realization that they must have already released their torpedoes. The initiative was in the hands of the enemy. In an instant, I yelled 2 orders. Launch torpedoes, hard right rudder." Not a single Japanese or American torpedo found its mark in the first exchange. Merrill then brought all his guns to bear. The Japanese answered in kind. The Japanese 8-inch gun salvos were either short or ahead. The Americans were luckier. 1 shell of their first broadside slammed amidships into the cruiser Sendai, which carried Admiral Ijuin. There was frantic maneuvering to avoid shells, with giant warships, yards apart at time, cutting at speeds of 30 knots. Still, Sendai managed to avoid 8 American torpedoes, even with her rudder jammed. Then a Japanese torpedo caught the USS destroyer Foote, DD-511, and blew off her stern, leaving her dead in the water. Samuel Eliot Morrison, in Breaking the Bismarck Barrier, tells how Merrill maneuvered his cruisers so smartly and kept them at such range that no enemy torpedoes could hit. Admiral Omori showed the same skill and judgment, but he was a blind man. Only the American had radar. Hara afterwards explained, "Japan did not see the enemy, failed to size up the enemy, and failed to locate it. The Japanese fleet was a blind man swinging a stick against a seen opponent. The Japanese fleet had no advantage at all." What Japan had lacked in electronic sight, however, it partially made up with its super brilliant airplane drop flares and naval gunfire star shells. Commander Charles H. Paulo, U.S. Navy, a former radio officer on the Denver CL-58, recalled the unblinking star shells that would let you read the fine print in the Bible. The Japanese also had a range advantage in their 8-inch guns. Sometimes we couldn't touch them. 3 shells hit his Denver. Not 1 detonated, but the ship was damaged. Columbia, CL-56, also took an 8-inch hole through her armor plate. Then Merrill confused the enemy ships with smoke so dense that the Japanese believed the Americans were heading one way when they were in fact steaming in another direction. But before Admiral Omori could break away, Burke and his destroyer division of Little Beavers was in among them. First, the Sendai was sent to the bottom with 335 men. Then Hatsukaze, brushed in an accident with Myoko, was finished off by Burke's destroyers and sank with all hands on board, 240 men. Damaged were the cruisers Haguro, Myoko, and destroyers Shiratsuyu and Samadare. But, most important, the threat to the beachhead had been stopped. The Americans got off with severe damage to the foot and light damage to the Denver, Spence, DD-512, and Columbia. Hara later wrote, "Had they pursued us really hotly, practically all the Japanese ships would have perished. The Americans had left the fight too soon." And Admiral Ijuin's prediction that Japan would topple after the loss of Bougainville proved to be accurate, but not because of this loss particularly. It was just one of the number of defeats which were to doom Japan. Action ashore, Koromokina. Back on Bougainville, following the landing, the days D+1 to D+5 saw the initiation of Phase 2 of the operation, involving shifting of units' positions, reorganizing the shambles of supplies, incessant patrols, road building, the beginning of the construction of a fighter airstrip, and the deepening of the beachhead to 2,000 yards. Then, at dawn on the morning of 7 November, D+6, the Japanese struck. 4 of their destroyers put ashore 475 men well west of the marine perimeter, between the Laruma River and the Koromokina Lagoon. They landed in 21 craft, barges, ramped landing boats, even a motorboat, but to their disadvantage, along too wide a front for coordinating and organizing a strike in unison and immediately. A Marine Corps combat correspondent, Sergeant Cyril J. O'Brien, saw the skinny young Japanese who scampered up the beach with 80-pound packs 2.5 miles from the Laruma to near Koromokina, left flank of the Marines, to join their comrades. They were eager enough even to die. A little prayer often in the pockets of the dead voiced the fatalistic wish that, whether I float a corpse under the waters or sink beneath the grasses of the mountainside, I willingly die for the Emperor. The first few Japanese ashore near Laruma, however, did not die. An anti-tank platoon with the 9th Marines did not fire because the landing craft in the mist looked so much like their own, even to the big white numbers on the prow. Near Koromokina, they seemed to be all over the beach. One outpost platoon, which included Private First Class John F. Perella, 19 years old, was cut off on the beach. Perella swam through the surf 1,000 yards to Marine lines and came with a Navy rescue boat and earned a Silver Star Medal. Lieutenant Colonel Walter Asmuth, Jr., commanding officer of the 3rd Battalion 9th Marines, ordered a company attack, called on mortars and artillery of the 12th Marines. The Japanese were well equipped with the so-called knee mortars, actually grenade launchers, and Nambu machine guns and fought back fiercely. In that jungle, you could not see, hear, or smell a man 5 feet away. Private First Class Chalice L. Still found a faint trail and settled his machine gun beside it. An ambush was easy. The lead Japanese were close enough to touch when Still opened up. He killed 30 in the column. He was a recipient of the Silver Star Medal. Yet the Japanese didn't give way. Ashore only hours, they had already dug strong defenses. Even a Marine double envelopment in water, sometimes up to the waist, did not work. By 13:15, the weakened 9th Marines Company was relieved by the 1st Battalion 3rd Marines, coming in from the beachhead's right flank. During the darkness on that night of 7 November, enemy infiltrators got through to the hospital. Bullets ripped through tents as surgeons performed operations. The doctors of the 3rd Medical Battalion, under Commander Robert R. Calloway, were protected by a makeshift line of cooks, bakers, and stretcher bearers. As a memorable statistic, less than 1% died of wounds on Bougainville after having arrived at a field hospital. The 1st Battalion was close to the enemy, close enough to exchange shouts. The Japanese yelled, "Moline, you die," and the Marines made earthy references to Premier Tojo's diet. Marine Captain Gordon Warner was fluent in Japanese, so he could quickly reply to the Japanese, even yell believable orders for a bayonet charge. He received the Navy Cross for destroying machine gun nests with a helmet full of hand grenades. He lost a leg in the battle. Sergeant Herbert J. Thomas gave his life near the Koromakina. His platoon was forced prone by machine gun fire, and Thomas threw a grenade to silence the weapon. The grenade rebounded from jungle vines, and the young West Virginian smothered it with his body. He posthumously was awarded the Medal of Honor. General Turnage saw that reinforcements were needed. The day before, 6 November, the 1st echelon of the 21st Marines had come ashore. Now the battle command was transferred to Lieutenant Colonel Ernest W. Fry, Jr. of the 1st Battalion. With 2 companies, he was set for a counterattack, but not until after 2 intense saturations of the Japanese positions by mortars and 5 batteries of artillery. They slammed into a concentrated area, 300 yards wide and 600 deep, early on 8 November. Light tanks then moved in to support the attack. When Colonel Fry's advancing companies reached the area where the Japanese had been, there was stillness, desolation, plowed earth, and uprooted trees. Combat correspondent Elvin Josephy wrote of men hanging in trees. Some lay crumpled and twisted beside their shattered weapons, some covered by chunks of jagged logs and jungle earth, by a blasted bunker. In that no-man's land, Colonel Fry and his men walked over and around the bodies of over 250 enemy soldiers. To complete the annihilation of the Japanese landing force, Marine dive bombers from Munda bombed and strafed the survivors on 9 November. By now, the veteran 148th Infantry, the 1st unit of the Army's 37th Infantry Division, was coming ashore, seasoned in the Munda campaign on New Georgia. Later, to take over the left flank of the beachhead, would come its other infantry regiments, the 129th on 13 November and the 145th on 19 November. The Army's 135th, 136th, and 140th Field Artillery came ashore too, and would be invaluable in supporting later advances on the right flank. Major General Robert S. Baitler, U.S. Army, was division commander. Sidebar: 37th Infantry Division. Called the Buckeye Division, the 37th was among the very first American troops sent to the Pacific at the beginning of the war. The 37th was an outfit with a long history and many battle streamers, dating from August 1917, when it was formed at Camp Sheridan, Alabama. It left for overseas in 1918 and took part in 5 major operations in France before returning in 1919 and facing demobilization that same year. As an Ohio National Guard unit, the Buckeye Division was inducted into federal service in 1940, and by June of 1942 it was heading into the Pacific War, sent to garrison the Fiji Islands. First combat was on New Georgia, which included taking the critical Munda airfield. The 37th joined the 3rd Marine Division on Bougainville, and then trained on the island for the campaign on Luzon Island in the Philippines. Landing with the 6th Army at Lingayen Gulf, 9 January 1945, the 37th raced inland to Clark Field at Fort Stotsenburg. It entered Manila, and its commander, Major General Robert S. Baitler, accepted the surrender of General Tomoyuki Yamashita. Next came the capture of Baguio and the liberation there of 1,300 internees at the Bilibid prison. The division came home for demobilization in November 1945. Its commander, Major General Baitler, was born 21 March 1892 and enlisted in the U.S. Army as a private in 1911. Promoted quickly to corporal, sergeant, and then first sergeant of his company, he was then commissioned as a second lieutenant in March 1914. After service on the Mexican border, he took part in 5 major campaigns in World War I with the famous 42nd Rainbow Division. A graduate of Ohio State University, Baitler finished first in his class in the Reserve Officers Course of the Command and General Staff School, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, in 1926. After that, he served as a member of the War Plans Division of the War Department General Staff, 1932-36. After World War II, he assumed command of the 5th Service Command at Fort Hays, Ohio, and then was assigned, 1947, to the Personnel Board of the Secretary of War. In 1949, he was sent to the Far East and took over the Marianas Bonin's command on Guam. In 1950, he was named Deputy Governor of the Ryukyus Command on Okinawa. Major General Baitler received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest honor, for his leadership in the Philippine Campaign, as well as a Distinguished Service Medal for the New Georgia operation, with an oak leaf cluster as a second award for his outstanding service on Bougainville and then on Luzon and the Philippine Islands. He also wore the Legion of Merit with oak leaf cluster, the Bronze Star with oak leaf cluster, the Silver Star Medal, and the Purple Heart. He died 12 February 1978. End of chapter 4.